In the previous session, I asked you to share your thoughts on what you learned in the first social studies class was worth memorizing or not. And I also asked you to think about whether teaching these students to memorize certain terms, concepts, or definitions in this era when you just can Google it or ask to Siri is worth it or not. Do we need to teach students to memorize these concepts? Well, this is again an open-ended question which does not have right or wrong answer. So I think you will have different opinions, but I want you to be aware of two things. First, memorizing isn't always a bad thing because it can, we are going to learn in this video, but what students have in their previous memories can play a role as prior knowledge. So when they're learning new concepts, when they're getting new knowledge, this newly learned information can be anchored to the prior knowledge and it can be solidified. The other factor, however, is that as a teacher, we have to be very discreetful. We have to consider carefully whether what we are making students memorize is worth their memorization and effort and time. Like we tend to teach the concepts only because it is on the textbook or because it is what we are because we think we need to teach them. Like for instance, I think that American children have to memorize all the 50 states and maybe the state capital of each state. Um, but I'm not sure how many social studies teachers really thought about like whether it is worth making them memorize these kind of states and capital cities of each state. So memorization itself or memorizing itself isn't a bad thing, and it can also be a good thing because memory plays a role when it comes to learning new knowledge, as a prior knowledge. However, it's really important to think about whether making students memorize certain type of facts is worth their time and effort. Speaking of that, I want to talk more about long-term memory. So as you can see, among sensory register, working memory, and long-term memory is the memory system that we are going to focus and dig deeper because it is closely related to learning. Again, I want you to use your cognitive power to guess the blank in this learning objective. You will be able to apply your knowledge of long-term memory storage to identify effective strategies for enhancing students' learning. In other words, we are going to learn about meaningful learning strategies in this video. But first, let's think about how the contents, like the different types of contents that are stored in long-term memory. So there are broadly two types of knowledge that are stored in long-term memory. One is declarative knowledge, which is how things are, were, will be, or might be. It includes general word knowledge, such as what is the capital of like France, which is Paris, or specific life experiences, like what you did during the weekend or what you had for your lunch. These are all declarative knowledge, and they tend to be explicit, and because we are conscious of what we know. Another type of the other type of knowledge that is stored in long-term memory is procedural knowledge, and this is related to how or when to do things, and they tend to be implicit in that we cannot consciously record or explain. For instance, how many of you know how to ride a bike? Those who can easily ride a bike. However, if someone asks you how you can ride a bike, can you tell me how you need to ride a bike? It's kind of hard to explain. Like first you need to ride on the seat and then put your foot on the pedal and try to circulate it. It's kind of like hard to explain and record consciously. And this type of knowledge is known as procedural knowledge. And this kind of knowledge, different types of knowledge, are structured in our long-term memory. And we are going to now look at how this knowledge is organized. So we have concepts, which are mental groupings of objects or events that have something in common. Like for instance, insects. We have the concepts of insects that have, like when we are thinking of insects, they have six legs. Some of them can bite human beings like mosquitoes. Some of them have antennae. Many, all of them have antennae actually, right? So with these concepts, we are able to categorize objects and events. Schemas are a bigger and broader term that include multiple concepts. So in other words, it's an organized body of knowledge about something, like a file of information or a concept map about you have concept map that you have about something. Like again, when you're thinking of the concept insects, there are many other concepts that are related to the insects, right? For instance, what type of animals eat insects, or what insects survive on. Like for instance, ants eat some kind of grasses, some kind of plants. I don't know. I'm not very. I do not have very solid schemas about insects, but like insects, maybe how they can be compared to animals. So these kind of related knowledge is called a schema. And scripts is a type of schema, but that is related to events. So schemas that include a series of predictable events about a particular activity. Like for instance, thinking about going to a doctor and picking a prescription. And you can probably explain, or you can do this activity without difficulties because you know the procedures, right? First, you need to make an appointment, then you need to go to the hospital. You need to check in with the office worker, wait for a little, and meet your doctor. Tell your symptoms, get the prescription, ask the prescription, and go to the like pharmacy. You know those kind of procedures are scripts. Now, we are going to learn about how we can help students save information and recall it later. There are multiple strategies that, listed in our textbook, but I want to kind of organize the information in three ways to help you learn the things more easily and meaningfully. So the first way of doing it is activating students' prior knowledge. Again, this is where our memory can play a key role. And second, we can teach them to use surface level memorization strategies to keep it activated in working memory. And this is where the working memory chimes in. Do you remember the picture of information processing theory? So in order for information to be moved from working memory to long-term memory, we also need help from the working memory. So although we are focusing on long-term memory and long-term memory storage in this video, we also need to we also need to learn some strategies that are related to working or short-term memory. And last but not least, we need to provide opportunities to students so that they can engage deeply with the material. In other words, meaningful learning, and which is the focus of our video. Right. Then let's look at how we can activate students' prior knowledge. There can be multiple ways, but one way is to explicitly remind students of things that they know that bear directly on a topic of classroom study. Like for instance, when in science course and there are lessons about plants, we can ask students to describe what their parents do to keep flowers or vegetable gardens growing. And then they can think about how their parents water their plants or give them some fertilizers. And this kind of prior knowledge can help them learn new concepts or new information about plants. Or a lesson about football. We can ask students who have watched the final match of Buckeye versus the team up north. and those kind of episodic memory can also help them learn like some new rules or some new facts about football. Then let's look at how we can promote students, how we can facilitate students' working memory. So three strategies that I want to cover is rehearsing, rehearsing, chunking, and mnemonics. So rehearsing is repeating the information in working memory over and over. So it's basically the maintenance rehearsal that we learn during the information processing theory. So, like when someone, for instance, gives you a phone number, you you consciously or unconsciously repeat the phone number until you can write it down. And this is one of the most common strategies that people use to retain information in their working memory. And another very important and useful strategy is chunking, which is breaking information into more manageable bits. So, as we have already learned, working memory has a limited capacity, and it can hold the information that is from it really varies among individuals, but usually people can hold chunks of information from like 4 to 10 chunks of information in their working memory. So, and that is the reason why we are telling, so when we are giving our phone number to others, we do not say, oh, it is 8, 4, 9, 7, 8, 6. We don't tell our number like that, right? Because the other people will think that, oh, maybe this person does not want to share their phone number. So we usually make these chunks as like 8, 4, 7, 7, 8, 6, 1, 2, 5, 9, so that the other person can memorize this and retain this information in the working memory more easily. Again, if I ask you to memorize the words F, B, I, PH, D, MAI, B, M, it'll be much harder for you to memorize. But if I present this information as FBI, PhD, MA, IBM, then it becomes more meaningful and it's more manageable. And unfortunately, there are still some concepts or information where students do not have much prior knowledge or kind of hard to like use the chunking strategy. Then that in that time, you can use the mnemonics, which are memory tricks. And there are many mnemonics like keyword method or acronyms. So for instance, again, I was an English teacher, and one of the grammatical rules that my students found most like confusing is that so when in present tense, if the subject is third person singular, like he, she, or it, there you need to put s at the end of the verbs, right? And my students found it very confusing because in Korean we do not have such conjugation rules, so they often make mistakes. And one of my students come up with this mnemonic, which seemed to be very, very helpful. So so he made mnemonics by extracting the very first few letters of she, he, it, shit, and and that's how he remembered um, that if the present tense is used and if the subject is he or she or it, you need to put some s's on like s on at the end of the verbs. And it was quite effective among our students. So you can make your own mnemonics, or you can have students make their own mnemonics when teaching some kind of tricky information or where that students do not have much prior knowledge. And now, finally, meaningful learning strategies. So for these strategies we are going to learn, I want to focus on elaboration, organization, and visual imagery. Although there are many other meaningful learning strategies, I want to focus on these three. So elaboration is expansion of a concept and connecting it to what we know. So it's kind of similar to activating prior knowledge, but it differs in that it kind of expands on the concept that students um, already know. So examples can be like coming up with examples, explaining it to a peer, acting it out, creating a metaphor, applying the information to new problems. So the example of shit for the mnemonic is an elaboration of like how we can use elaboration. So I'm using examples to elaborate the concept of mnemonics, which we just covered, right? So you can come up with examples, or you can have students explain this concept to other students, because when we are explaining things, we have to have a solid understanding of that concept. So there are multiple ways that you can use the strategy of elaboration. Organization is putting information in a logical order or structure. So the very table that you're looking at is an example of organization. And the other examples can be concept map. And do you remember the concept map that is drawn by the students? It's the insect concept map. So this kind of concept map, using this kind of concept map can also be a strategy of organization. And this kind of organization is helpful because it can show how various ideas, how various concepts are interrelated. Last but not least, visual imagery, using visuals to help explain new concepts. So learners tend to understand the content or information better if they are dual coded. So if they both hear or read the concepts, they tend to understand the concepts better. So that is the reason why I think students these days prefer to learn by watching lectures rather than just reading videos, because when reading, only the textual information can be coded, whereas watching the lecture video, both the text, um, visual, and also the like auditory data can be coded into the memory and the cognitive processes. The example can be the information cognitive processing model that I showed you, um, um, is an example of visual imagery. Without that image or without the photo, it could have been more difficult for you to understand or conceptualize the information processing theory. You can also emphasize the importance of meaningful learning by communicating that school topics are to be understood rather than memorized. So do not just tell students that, hey, you should memorize these facts or you should memorize this information. You can try to make them understand the topics or concepts, and explaining that these topics are to be understood rather than to be memorized. And also, less is more. Um, I know this is it can sometimes hard to practice this, but at least in this video, I'm trying to practice less is more principle by only just covering 3 strategies from the meaningful learning strategies and 3 strategies from the rote learning strategies. So less material that is studied thoroughly rather than superficially is learned more completely and with greater understanding. So again, instructors um, always need to balance the width and the breadth, but we should constantly remind ourselves that not less is sometimes better. So far in this lecture, I have constantly emphasized how important prior knowledge is to long-term storage or long-term memory. Prior knowledge, again, is the knowledge base that is needed for meaningful learning. It is helpful in that it can direct students' attention, and in that provides details for elaboration and inferences. Prior knowledge also provides framework for organizing the new information. We have also learned what we can do if students do not have prior knowledge. One of the strategies that we can use is using mnemonics, like HOMES for Great Lakes or SHIT for English grammatical rule. However, the prior knowledge can sometimes lead to misconceptions and we are going to cover it in the next video. Before moving on to the next session, I want you to engage in the discussion activity where you are going to think about how you are going to apply all these learning strategies that we have learned, um, like both meaningful strategies and rote learning strategies in your own learning.